On this episode of Marketing Mavericks, we talk about the NFL, the World Series, hockey, soccer, apps, fan engagement, and more. Coming up next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Marketing Mavericks is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This episode of Marketing Mavericks is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free 2-week trial and 10% off, go to squarespace.com and use offer code MM. This is Marketing Mavericks, episode 28, recorded Thursday, October 23rd, 2014, tracking the Sportsball. Welcome to Marketing Mavericks, where we talk about everything at the intersection of marketing and technology, everything that's happening on the web and social media, advertising, creative. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And how can we do it better? We talk about all of that and more onto this show. I'm Tonya Hall. I'm your host, and we have a couple of guests that are going to join us, and we're going to talk about sports, what's happening in sports. Oh my gosh, it's all about the sports right now. We've got the World Series, we've got NFL started, we've got hockey happening, basketball. We're going to talk about how marketing is evolving in that space and how consumers are using it, including paying for things at the baseball game, at the big World Series. We've got Bryan Rich joining us. Bryan Rich is the managing director at Little M Media, and he's at Bryan Rich on Twitter. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you for having me. Always, it's good to be back. It's been a while.
It has been too long. I love having you on the show. And we've also got another Bryan Kramer. He is a CEO of Pure Matter. He is an author. He's a speaker and a really busy guy. I'm super glad to have you for the very first time, Bryan, with a Y on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Big fan of yours. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm already said, and I'm just going to make this really clear. There may be some confusion at some point because I'm going to be like, Bryan, what do you think? And just feel free, either one of you, to chime in if I'm not very specific. But lots to talk about today, and we'll start with sports and what's happening with the World Series. I don't know. So what side are we on here? Are we a Royals fan? Are we a Giants fan?
Go Giants.
Go Royals.
This is going to be fun.
I feel like the crowd is definitely going to be weighted towards the Giants, given the location of where you are, Tonya, and the tech-oriented nature of the show. That lends itself towards the San Francisco, fan base more than the small market, Midwestern, lovable underdog fan base of Kansas City.
Yeah, I don't know. You're a big sports fan, Bryan, with an I. What is your favorite sport right now? Because your head's probably spinning. I mean, we have baseball happening. It's the World Series. We've got NFL. We've got hockey still happening. I mean, there's all kinds of exciting distractions for you. What has piqued your interest the most?
Well, baseball is always my favorite sport. I think, just the beauty and the complexity and the history of baseball is just extraordinary. So I love, pretty much all sports. I certainly do. I cannot deny that. But baseball is my first and truest love when it comes to sports. So this is, the last several weeks with the playoffs and now the World Series are just sort of the most wonderful time of the year, if you will.
So, it's some interesting statistics we were talking about before the show with, since we're talking first about baseball, is they've actually had, they started earlier this week with game one and recorded the lowest ever ratings for the World Series game. And I guess I want to know from you, Bryan, with an I, what does Major League Baseball need to do to get fans to watch? How do they get people to watch the game?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion lately about the speed of the game, and Major League Baseball launched a committee recently to look at a number of ways to shorten the game length. There's this argument that sports like football and basketball have much more action involved. I happen to think that part of what makes baseball so wonderful is the the lack of a clock and the lack of that sort of artificial urgency that comes with it. Not to say that football or hockey or basketball or any of those sports that do have clocks are bad because they have them, but part of what makes baseball wonderful is the fact that it doesn't have the clock. A couple thoughts, though, just sort of off the top of my head. One is I'm a parent. I have a almost 7-year-old and a 4.5-year-old, both of whom are baseball fans. We got baseball fans, all over our family. And, starting these games after 8 p.m. makes it impossible for anyone with kids to watch. I can't, my son would love to stay up and watch. My daughter would love to stay up and watch. And it's just not an option. They're asleep by the time the game starts, by the time the first pitch is thrown. So I think there is this whole sort of what would be the best way, not only for current fans, those of us who are diehards now, but also building up the next generation of fans, having to do with the start time of the game. That's one. Two, I think there's a lot of criticism of the presence of small market teams. There's no Yankees or Red Sox or Dodgers, from LA or whatever. It's Kansas City and San Francisco, which, though San Francisco has had a lot of success over the last several years, by comparison to the Angels and the Dodgers in California alone, are probably the third team in the pecking order in terms of media influence, in terms of marketability and things like that. What I would say to Major League Baseball is I think it's really sort of a laziness or a lack of creativity. There is so much about the sport, the game of baseball. There's so much about the individual personalities on a number of these teams, on just the nature of these games. These games are, featuring incredible pitching and incredible timely hitting and exciting, base stealing and sacrifices. And, Kansas City has one of the best defenses in, statistical history for the league. And you're not hearing a lot of those things marketed. They continue to set up this sort of old trope of, power hitting and shutdown pitching. And, if you get a game where a guy gives up a few runs, people tune out because they don't realize that, in fact, baseball is one of those games that, anything can happen at any point, and it's incredibly exciting. So I think there's just a lot of almost misrepresentation, misbranding around baseball that I think, could be addressed to bring more fans in.
So I know you're a big Mariners fan, and I know that there's a lot of pressure, and I want to talk about the NFL and what they're doing too, in a comparison between the NFL and Major League Baseball. But from a team standpoint, who's actually done a really good job of engaging fans and getting them interested in not just attending games, but buying merchandise, getting them to support their athletes? Who's marketing their teams the best? Is it the Mariners? I mean, are we going to show a little favoritism, or is there another team that's actually doing a pretty good job?
It's a great question. San Francisco has done very well, and a lot of people say that's not all that surprising because a lot of that engagement has increasingly been done over social media, and being in San Francisco and sort of near Silicon Valley, there's a lot of interest and connectivity and expertise in that. I have a good friend who works as a social media director for Houston. Houston has done a very good job. Not surprisingly, I think it's actually a lot of the smaller market teams, Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Minnesota Twins, Kansas City, these teams that sort of have not become so reliant on the big television audiences and the big press corps to help elevate the team and to help sell tickets. Have really worked hard to think of creative ways to engage fans, ways to make baseball that much more personable, more family-oriented in some cases, and have been successful. On the football side, just as a comparison, the Seahawks have been very successful. I think, again, San Francisco, because of their presence there, has been very successful. The teams you don't hear about as much are definitely teams like the Yankees and the Mets in baseball in New York. The Giants and the Jets in New York again, because, I think these larger cities with these larger television deals get a little complacent. They don't realize how important it is to engage fans, and not just diehard fans, but kind of the casual fan, the broader universe of fans who are, very much interested, but not going to work as hard on their own to take those steps to, get connected to their team.
So you mentioned Seattle, and last year with the Seahawks, I did become a little bit of a Seahawks fan. There was a lot of controversy, and a couple of specifically one of the players, and we see that happening in NFL. We see it happening in other sports where the media blows up and fans become disenchanted. How big of an impact is the public relations aspect of supporting, issues, whether it's an issue that's very controversial, like an NFL player who, was accused of, spousal abuse, and it was a negative reflection on not just the team and how they handled it, but NFL in general was slammed for overlooking, and now they're, doing a lot of back end, trying to win fans over. Did that actually affect them from the standpoint of advertisers? Did advertisers back out? Did fans stop buying merchandise? Did they stop, supporting the team? I mean, how big of an impact is public relations, and what is the NFL doing to make sure that they come out and are open and upfront about issues like that?
Well, it's a tough question to answer where we are right now. I think certainly if you look at the National Football League and the trouble that it's had with domestic violence and the Ray Rice incident, and even the criticism that it has taken for its sort of marketing-driven embracing of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, for example, there is certainly a lot of negative press. If you were doing polling or tracking just on brand perception, the NFL has taken a fairly significant hit. Now, whether or not that impacts the bottom line, whether or not it impacts ticket sales, whether it impacts long-term fan engagement, my hope is that, yes, the NFL actually loses some fans as a result of its poor handling and its poor policies on things like domestic violence, so that it will learn that it can't just get away with not punishing people who step out of line, or violate sort of, if not the actual rules, the sort of social mores, the social code of our, the universe that we live in. But we don't know yet. The ratings have not been significantly impacted. The, people who have abandoned the NFL are probably more anecdotal than, statistically measurable. Though there are certainly people who have given up. But the concussion crisis, for example, has, by many accounts, by many people's analysis, the potential to destroy the league over the course of the next decade or two, because at the youth football level, for example, all of these parents who are seeing what concussions do to football players are not allowing their kids to play youth football. And if there isn't a pipeline of youth football to then high school to then college, then you're not going to have the quality of play on the field for the NFL. The NFL seems not to really be all that invested in long-term thinking, nor, if I was their CFO, would I probably say they need to be, because they just signed another obscenely large television contract. And, the sponsors, though they were, very critical of the way the NFL handled things and the way Commissioner Goodell handled things, nobody actually really cut their ties. Nobody took that much of a stand. So I think in the short term, PR matters, because it certainly puts these issues on the map in a way that only sports really can in many cases, in terms of elevating it to the public consciousness. But long term, the jury is still out. My hope is that, yes, that public relations and public affairs screw-ups do have a chilling effect on fan engagement with something like the National Football League, so that we can actually see the National Football League act more like a good citizen than just someone who cares only about the money and not about what the fans believe, or or the safety and health of their players and their families, for example.
Bryan, there you go.
Bryan with an I, even though you went to Michigan University, I actually still agree with you. I know.
Wait.
Are you Ohio State or Michigan State?
Michigan State. My wife went to
That's
Michigan
fine.
State.
I was worried that I would have to, use smaller words and speak more slowly, but you should be okay, and we can just agree to disagree on this one. Big game this weekend, Tonya, Saturday, in-state rivalry, Michigan State.
I'll be watching it, and and I hope that they use little words while they're playing so I can understand it.
Right.
But I agree with you. I think that I think what you're saying there makes a lot of sense, especially from a PR perspective and them embracing it. I always say a lot. One of the things that we need to do is embrace our inner Fockers, our Fokker moments, and that's from, if you see Meet the Parents, Gaylord Fokker. That Meet the Parents movie really identified what really could go wrong in life. At almost every 5 minutes in the movie, and it did. It happened to him, and I think a lot of that stuff actually happened to me. I'm not sure, but I think that one of the things that you pointed out, and that's like how people actually respond. And in sports, it's like a magnifying glass. People are paying so much attention to the response that people have, almost more so than the actual incident itself. And I think that the more that especially the NFL, that sports in general can actually get a grip on taking a cue, like what you're talking about, Bryan, getting and identifying and embracing their inner Fokker in the moment and just saying, yeah, that sucks, and we don't want that to happen, and we're going to fix it in the following ways. I think that would just go miles if they actually just owned it. But that's, I'm not in their position, so.
Well, and I think, just to pick up on that, I mean, I think the issue that continues to come up is this, whether or not we can make a direct connection between the fans' willingness to support a sport or the league's ability to generate revenue and these events, right? So the NFL makes money whether or not people like the NFL or not. In fact, there's a big argument that, even though people are well aware of the concussion crisis and seemingly frustrated with the NFL's handling of the concussion crisis in the moment and sort of in a broader way with the lawsuits and their unwillingness to pay out to the alumni of the league and things like that, that people are still watching. In fact, they're watching more because of the excitement, because of the competitiveness, et cetera. Fans need to realize that the leagues exist because they exist. So if nobody was watching football on television, then the NFL would not get those contracts. If nobody was buying those jerseys, then these teams would not be making the millions of dollars in terms of their revenue. So we might shame the league or shame a team for acting poorly, but then we also give them a pass by tuning in or buying that next jersey or that next hat and sort of saying, well, I can't really change anything. It's a similar argument to politics and democracy. If you don't vote, then you're not really in a credible position to say, those politicians all suck. Now, it's not enough necessarily for just one person to vote. We all have to vote for there to be a high-functioning democracy, and the same is true in the fan context. But we have to connect the economic realities of being a fan if we want these leagues to change. And that is all the more true in, I think, a digital social world because, all the hatred that you might spew over Twitter, it's the rare situation, to be honest, when that kind of directed social action results in offline action. And ultimately, that's the connection we need to make. I don't know that there's anybody out there who thinks what Ray Rice did was even remotely acceptable or that he should ever have an opportunity to participate in the league again. But we haven't held the Ravens or the NFL's feet truly to the fire. We just shamed them in social media. And Roger Goodell probably isn't even on Twitter and probably doesn't really even care what people are saying on social media. What he cares is, 70,000 people pouring into a stadium and, billions of dollars coming in from a television network. And, rightly so, because that's his job.
But we see social media having an impact, specifically Twitter, when it comes to driving ratings for television and movies. Are we not seeing that same impact in sports?
Well,
Bryan,
yes and no. I mean, I think we're seeing huge consumption of sports across media and technology. We're seeing huge amounts of money being spent, on every channel and every device to consume and to influence sports. But we're also then seeing, I think, a disconnect back, right? So where's the feedback loop? How are people able to use technology to influence the way sports are run? You really don't. Fans are a relatively captive audience. If the league chooses, and it's happening right now in the National Football League, right? They just signed this massive television contract, but made some very clear choices that they're not going to make games, as available across digital platforms as they could, probably because they'll get a massive paycheck for that in a few years. But so, as a fan, like, what power do I have even with technology? Do I not tune in? I suppose that is one way of doing it. But, in politics and in retail and activism, there seems to have been, the pattern seems to have been figured out. The code seems to have been cracked a bit more, where we can use these devices to send messages that more directly impact sales or reputation or market standing that at present the sports teams and leagues are almost impervious to.
So
I kind of think I do think that it is going to have an impact, and I think that that it's going to have an impact because they're starting to shift the way they get paid in their royalties and their contracts on social media, in being a sports influencer, which is obviously much different than being in any other kind of influencer. They get paid, a lot of them to tweet. They get paid a lot of them to appear on an interview online. A lot of these things are going to shift the way that they start to respond and react, because as they're getting paid to be social influencers, and using things like Rainforest, which is all dedicated to building sports influencers up and paying them to do these sorts of activities. I think as they start to take place take part in those kinds of activities, it's going to start to have a repercussion on them when they start to get responses and how many impressions or retweets or things that start to go up or down and how they sell themselves. So they're going to start to hopefully see that these kinds of things pay when they do well. And they don't pay as well when they don't. Now that's going to take a while. I don't think it's anything that's going to happen overnight. But from an influencer standpoint, it is something that is rolling out, and it's going to become more and more prevalent.
So I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, not because I don't think that is true, that some of that will happen, but because I actually think that social reinforcement of influencer behavior is not ultimately the thing that's going to drive revenue in a big way up or down for these teams. I do think what we're seeing with the use of data and mobile devices, particularly with the in-stadium engagement and the ways that, the FC Kansas City in Major League Soccer and the Niners, the San Francisco 49ers, are really starting to personalize the individual media experience and fan experience in a really compelling way because of the intelligence they're able to collect through all of the different actions. I think that type of thing is going to have a much more direct influence on whether or not people buy more tickets or buy more merchandise or that second soda or beer or whatever it is, because what you're doing is you're able to take someone who is connected to your team or to your sport and deepen that connection to the point where they do achieve that level sort of a super fan status. I don't happen to think that, basic kind of passive social actions, if someone tweets positively or negatively, I don't think that the revenue impact of that type of influencer stuff is ever going to have the same kind of, influence that the direct engagement and the more intelligent and more thoughtful approach to sort of fan-centric management of these enterprises is going to have.
You're talking about selling tickets, though.
I'm talking about selling everything, because everything that's not selling tickets
direct to the athlete. And I think that their outside influence is not going to be directly affected by mobile. I think that their outside influence and where they receive their royalties is going to be affected by the deals they make with Nike. And where they receive their money, and that social influence is certainly going to. I know that they're monitoring that, and how they see the social influence metric rise up or down is whether they're going to give them more money or less.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's still going to go back to who sells shoes and who doesn't. So, LeBron James is going to sell more shoes than anybody else because he wins championships and wins MVP awards. Kevin Durant wins the MVP award and he gets a bigger contract because he's more marketable. I don't think that's specifically social. And I would go one step further, which is very few athletes, for any number of reasons, very few athletes are genuinely connected to fans across social. There are certainly some, and there are those who are better at promoting, but I think it's a relatively soft connection, point. I just don't feel like social is going to so dramatically change the relationship between the fan and the athlete or the fan and the team. At the end of the day, if the guy wins a championship, you're going to buy his shoes. If he doesn't, but he's a really nice guy on Twitter, you're not going to go shell out $150 for his shoes just because he's a nice guy on Twitter. And Nike isn't going to say, oh, he's got a huge Twitter following, but he's riding the pine, for the 8th best team in the, Eastern Division, that's going to open up a lucrative contract. Now, it might open up a nice television future because you're a personality people want to tune into or similar, but I find it very hard to believe that the connection between, social media influence and contracts size is going to be, substantial. It might be incrementally. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I just don't think it's going to be game changing.
I agree with both of you to a point. I think that it's going to take a little bit more time for us to see the impact, especially when you look at it from a PR standpoint. I think there's more of an impact. You talked about the spousal abuse and what happened with that player and the team, and I think people had a negative response. But to your point, there are fans who are going to be there no matter what, and it's literally comes down to sales, right? It comes down to how many tennis shoes are sold, how many tickets are sold, and how many people attend events. And I do think social has a place in that, and I think it's for the fair weather fan, or for the the people who are not like me, like a super avid fan. I'm more of a passive fan. I like going to the games. I like the experience, but I think it has more of an effect on me and who I'm going to purchase. And I think those so I don't know. What do you think?
BK?
Yeah.
BK? Bryan with a Y?
I'm not sure if I actually heard a question or out of that.
Well, I think it's really has more of an impact on the second tier fan, the people who are not diehard fans. I think it's going to impact me on whether I decide to go. I mean, and I might want to attend if I see all of my friends on social media rallying behind a player or a team. That's actually what happened to me when I was in St. Louis, and I saw St. Louis. I saw St. Louis in the chat, so I was like, St. Louis, which I know, Bryan, you're a fan of the Blues, right? By the way,
I like the Blues. I have family in St. Louis, so I have a soft affection for the Cardinals. One of the best run franchises in baseball, by the way, care deeply about the fans, care deeply about that fan experience, and have built tremendous loyalty over the years, even when the team was not good. Now they're very good, and they have one of the best stadiums in the game, but they were able to maintain that sort of community connection all across, not all across, but around a good portion of the state of Missouri and that part of the Midwest, so that when the team actually rose up to the level where they were competitive, they had this base built in, sort of a case study in the fan engagement. And to your point, though, Tonya, yes, I think you're right. It is those casual fans that these issues are going to affect more significantly. And just the same, I think it's the choices that the NFL and Major League Baseball and those that are making with, for example, how they use technology and what they allow people to do with technology to engage with the sports that will make the difference between whether or not those casual fans will engage or not. The diehards, the season ticket holders, they will pay to get access to whatever app, whatever stream, whatever fantasy information, all of that. But will the casual fan pay to watch a game on a Tuesday night, between two teams that are not deeply personally connected to them? Probably not. Jeff Van Gundy talked about this today. I just posted it on my Facebook page about it. He was saying, now that the NBA is so flush with cash, we really need to take some time to think about what are we doing to enhance the fan experience, because it's easy to lose sight of that when, you've gotten your $24 billion paycheck.
Okay, I want to say that St. Louis Cardinals fan, absolutely, in the day when Mark McGwire was, taking away all of the media, and I had all the newspapers where he was winning. But then, right, it was very controversial to be a fan of Mark McGwire, and this was before social media was a very big part of our lives. So if that sort of controversy started then today, which we do see, I think you have a more immediate impact. So I may decide, I'm not interested in going to a game, so I'm not going to buy a ticket, and I'm not going to buy the Mark McGwire jersey, and I'm not going to spend money on somebody who I think is maybe a bad, role model for citizens. So I think that there is that part of it, and I think that's where the second screen too plays in. So, I might be using a second screen, and I might be at the, thinking about how I'm going to, I'm not on Facebook, I'm not at my computer, but I might be at the store and I'm seeing the news while I'm waiting in line. And I think it has more of an immediate impact. I just will say that. But I want to get to the kinds of technology and apps that people are really using right now in the space of sports, baseball, NFL, hockey. I'm a hockey fan. It seems like hockey maybe isn't as forward thinking as maybe some of the other leagues. But what do you think, Bryan? I mean, Bryan with an I. Are there some really interesting apps or technology that's helping engage fans and helping sales and that sort of thing?
Well, so I would separate apps and technology from content. I think the National Hockey League has been very smart and creative in making game highlights available, making teams and players very accessible, et cetera. They have an app for the league. There are some other coverage apps, but they've been using YouTube probably as effectively or more effectively than most of the other sports leagues. What you see a lot of the app sort of technology innovation around sports going towards is fantasy. Hockey does not have a huge fantasy following. It certainly doesn't have the kind of fantasy following that football has, and then baseball is right behind that. Basketball is coming up in terms of a fantasy league type thing. So a lot of the apps and a lot of the money that people see in the sports world is all focused around fantasy and, by extension, wagering. And that's been the argument about the economics of sports forever, that part of the reason that football is so incredibly popular and so many people watch football is because there's such a huge connection to gambling. And people want to see whether they cover the line or not. So there are some interesting apps in the fantasy world. I am not a big fantasy football person, so I would, embarrass myself trying to talk about some of them specifically. I will say this. I think the Major League Baseball app and what Major League Baseball Advanced Media is doing is still superior to any other league out there. I get, incredibly frustrated by the NFL app, for example, which for whatever inexplicable reason does not seem to be able to offer actual real-time score updates. Whereas I can watch, an entire game unfold and now during the playoffs, in 4, 5, 6 different camera angles, if I so choose, I can watch the dugout the whole time on my phone if I want to. Major League Baseball has managed to create that really powerful connection between the functionality, the devices, and the content, the spirit of the game, and sort of enhance that whole viewing and fan experience accordingly, whether you're watching on TV or at the ballpark. And I think the other leagues are still lagging in that capacity.
There was a story in Venture Beat about the rise of apps and how broadcasters should be concerned about that. What do you say? I mean, what do broadcasters need to do to not let this impact their bottom line?
Well, look, I mean, most people would argue that the only thing keeping television alive right now is live sports. It generates the most revenue in terms of TV rights and advertising dollars than just about anything. Live events are always going to be more compelling in a world where we can time shift our viewing. The problem is, I may not be sitting on my couch with my cable subscription when the World Series game comes on, or not the World Series because it's on network, but the playoffs, the baseball playoffs, were spread across Fox Sports 1 and TBS and ESPN at a couple of games, right? So if you're not a cable subscriber, you're screwed in terms of being able to watch. So, the enterprising leagues and the smart, particularly smaller conferences in things like college football, are starting to make all of their games available on online. The same way HBO is going to make its programming available online as an online subscription only. So I think the television folks have to figure out how to create both a better first screen product and probably a second screen accompaniment in order to stave off, the sports fan who wants to get their content through a mobile device or whatever. And keep in mind, it's not because, or I would argue, it's not because television is bad. I've been a cable subscriber all my life, and I will go down with the ship. I love cable. It's because I'm not sitting in my living room at all times when sports are on. And so if I'm out, at the playground and I want to watch that highlight, I should be able to do that. Golf has done that very well. College football, not so much. Football in general, not so much. Baseball, yes. Golf, yes. Basketball, hit or miss. But you have to realize that wherever I go, I'm a sports fan. So you should bring the sports fan experience to me and not require me to be sitting, in my living room at a certain time and pay for that, right? Because if it's not going to happen enough, I'm going to stop wanting to pay.
Well, and I want to talk more about that. Before I do, though, I actually want to thank a sponsor of Marketing Mavericks, which is Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. Here's some of the reasons that you are actually going to love Squarespace. They are consistently improving their platform with new features, new designs, and even better support. That's right. They have actually really beautiful designs. It's you want your website to look awesome. It represents you. It represents your brand. And they have 25 beautiful templates to start with, and recently added a logo creator tool, a basic tool for individuals and small businesses with limited resources to create a simple identity for themselves. Not everybody can hire a graphic designer on their team, so it's really great for somebody who wants some creative, and Squarespace offers that. It's easy to use. It's incredibly easy to use, in fact. But if you want some help, maybe you do. Maybe you want to, talk to somebody. Squarespace has a live chat and email support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Plus, there is a completely redesigned customer help site, in case you don't want to talk to anybody, for easier access to self-help articles and video workshops. And it's got e-commerce, such an important tool. And it's now available for all subscription plan levels, including the ability to accept donations. That's right, which is a great thing for nonprofits, cash wedding registries, and school fund drives. It's so inexpensive. On top of everything else, it's so affordable. It starts at just $8 a month and includes a free domain name if you sign up for a year. So if you're interested, hosting is also included. Squarespace takes care of the hosting so you don't have to. Here's what I say. You should start a 2-week trial with no credit card required. That's right. No credit card is required. Start building your website. When you decide to sign up for Squarespace, make sure to use offer code MM to get 10% off and to show your support for Marketing Mavericks. We thank Squarespace for their support of Marketing Mavericks. A better web awaits, and it starts with your new Squarespace website. Thank you so much, Squarespace, for your support. We love you. And, I know Bryan with a Y, you're going to have to scoot out of here. You've done a lot of great work. You've actually got a book that I wanted to talk about. I know we're going to run out of time. We got it started a little late, but tell us about your book and how somebody might be able to purchase that.
It can be found at bryankramer.com. And if you click on book, it is right there, or it's always on Amazon. There's no B2B or B2C. It's H to H, human to human. Or you can just Google search, and I'm sure it'd come right up. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, and we'll have to have you come back and talk more about what is human to human. So
I'd love to. Next time I'm going to bring my sports almanac with me too.
Yeah, Bryan with an eye can really throw down on sports. Sorry about that.
Oh wait, you went to Michigan State. Is that a picture book?
Oh.
So my wife went there.
Couldn't resist.
But I'll let her know.
That is so wrong.
Cheers.
Thanks, Bryan. There's a lot that we can talk about, and clearly we have covered a lot in the sports space. But I want to find out from you, who is actually doing a really good job, and why? Is it a specific league? Is there a better sports team that's actually doing something that others should actually look at and maybe model? Bryan with an I.
I think there's only one Bryan now, so that I mean, you can call me that if you'd like.
But I'm so used to doing that. I don't know if I can stop.
I know. So, I mean, I mentioned Major League Baseball, and I still think, and I regularly talk about how I think Major League Baseball has figured out how to both present baseball league-wide and sort of introduce the sport in a digital capacity, but also for all the individual fans, create the kind of direct connection to each of those teams. Now, some of those teams are investing more heavily in, social marketing managers and things like that. Like I mentioned, my friend Amanda Reich in Houston, who's terrific, and other teams. The Mets and Yankees have been a bit slower on some of that. So I think they're doing very well. I think you're starting to see some sophistication league-wide. There's certainly a lot of bells and whistles and technology for the NBA and the NFL. I don't know that they have managed to balance things like access to scores and access to news with the things that make the fan experience really valuable, the things that you need to know to become connected to a team. The University of Michigan, Go Blue, they have a terrific social media presence, and do a lot of, sort of exclusive or original content that goes out to Michigan fans. And they're certainly not the only ones in college football and college sports who do it. But what I still think is missing really from all the teams and leagues is a significant commitment to casual fans, to parents, to people who come in for a big event, right? They watch the Super Bowl, they get attracted by, the excitement of the World Series or the Ryder Cup or the U.S. Open in tennis, whatever it is, but don't really understand how to translate that event interest into some kind of sustainable relationship with the sport or with a team or with an athlete. I think that bridge is missing, and I think there's obviously both a technological platform opportunity, given that so many of us are on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest and all of these places talking about other aspects of our lives. There's no reason sports couldn't be part of that, but there's also a big content piece and just an understanding that casual fans are not diehard fans, that we don't have, not everyone has season tickets to a game or would reschedule their wedding because Alabama is playing on a Saturday afternoon, and so that obviously is not a good time to get married or whatever it is. I think there's still some knowledge and understanding and data that could be applied to that challenge of fan engagement and change up the content and sort of the experience that gets created.
We're talking a lot about American sports, everything from a college level. You keep slapping down the whole Michigan, but to pro teams, but this all within the United States. What about international fans? I mean, what are they doing? We saw a lot happen. I think that might have been the last time you were on the show. We talked about soccer. Certainly, we did a whole show on that and globally what was happening and how social media had a huge impact on fan support and people getting much more engaged in soccer than they ever have been before. What are we seeing internationally? What's happening in that space? Certainly since soccer.
Well, first of all, keep in mind that the National Football League and the National Basketball Association and Major League Baseball would like to think of themselves as truly global sports. In reality, they're not super global sports. The NFL is playing a game this weekend in London, the second of the season. Baseball has the World Baseball Classic. Hockey is certainly a sport that draws its athletes from all over. But soccer and cricket and rugby, these are sports that are huge overseas, and I think much the same way that football is sort of the new national sport of the United States. Baseball is still the national pastime by name, but the most popular sport in the United States. You see countries like Brazil and Germany and Italy with their professional soccer leagues. You see the English Premier League and La Liga and the Champions League and all of those professional soccer leagues. They have some pretty sophisticated digital followings. Even just their connections across various screens. NBC broadcasts all of the English Premier League games online, in addition to on NBC and NBC Sports Network, NBCSN. So just right there, there's a significantly greater accessibility to things like the English Premier League and the ability to connect with those teams than you see from Major League Soccer. But it ebbs and flows. There are some teams, and often the teams that have more money, the Manchester Uniteds and the Liverpools and those guys that have more sophisticated, more significant commitments to fan engagement across digital platforms, and the lower level teams, have a nice social following, but just don't put the resources. They don't invest the time and the money to creating that original content and pushing out, the engagement opportunities. I think you will see, I guess I wouldn't say I don't know what you will see. I would like to think that the Women's World Cup this July or this summer, June, July, will be, the next great sort of global sports social moment, because you've got teams from all over the planet coming together to play in Canada. The U.S. is the number one team, but there's a very good rivalry with China. Canada is likely to, compete. The home team always does well. They always try to put on a good show. The Olympics will be back, in Brazil in a couple of years. That's a global conversation. So you'll see what happens from a social engagement standpoint in these other countries, how it compares to what you're seeing in the U.S. But, sports is in many respects more developed and more focused from an economic standpoint in the United States than anywhere else. Not entirely. English Premier League, huge. Cricket in India, huge, bigger than any sport on the planet. But you don't see the same media and digital sophistication in many respects as you do, because a lot of that innovation is just starting in the United States, and over time it'll probably get further wrapped around the globe.
This whole show has been focused on. It was only going to be half a show on sports, but there's just a lot to talk about. But I want to ask
another episode. Let's do it.
I know. You just came back from. You were involved in the Revolt conference that happened. We had Ted Cohen on the show talking about he was getting ready to head out. I followed all his pictures. It looked like it was a huge success. I still want Keith to come on the show at some point and talk about what he's doing in the space. But what was the big outcome from the music conference? You had a lot of speakers there talking about the evolution of music and artists and how they're marketing today, how they're engaging fans today. Just real quick, what was the outcome? What was the big takeaway from that event?
Well, first of all, go to revolt.tv, because they've been doing some really terrific summary coverage of what was discussed. The Disruptors panel in particular, which was talking a lot about streaming and how streaming is disrupting the economic model of the music industry, I think was one of the most honest, one of the most just substantial conversations you'll ever hear from a diverse group of people in the music industry. One of the big announcements that happened, Guy Oseary, who is U2 and Madonna's manager, and famous or infamous depending on who you ask, for striking the big deal for the automatic download of the U2 album with the new Apple operating system, announced that he was forming sort of a conglomerate, that his management company, Maverick, was now also going to include the 7 other top managers of global music talent. And one of the things that he talked about was how, these managers were now going to look at different technology platforms and say, what are the best ways for us to distribute music, to sell music, to make money on music? And how is it that we can help to shape and support innovation in Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley and Pittsburgh and Omaha, whatever, people who are creating new ways for fans to download and purchase and engage around music and musical artists. So I think there's, one of the things that that was talked a lot about was how people in the music industry do not do as much to kind of support and cultivate innovation within the community, within the space as tech industry does. And there's a lot that could be learned from the tech industry about, yes, competition, but also healthy co-opetition. So I would like to think that the big outcome coming from this is that more people in the music industry are going to really push and support innovation and look for partnerships and support partnerships that will drive innovation that help to sell more music.
Well, what's another whole conversation? We'll have to have you back when we do another music show. I've really love having you on the show, and I really appreciate your time and expertise. Bryan, you're also an author as well. We haven't talked about your book in a while, but you have you're also speaking at South by Southwest, right? I mean, are you speaking?
I will be at South by Southwest. I will be speaking. Whether anyone's listening, we'll find out in March. But I have a book. You can find me. My Twitter handle's my name. It's there on the lower third at Bryan Reich. You can Google me, shiftandreset.com. But yeah, I mean, sports, disaster preparedness. We should do a whole show on disaster preparedness because there's just some crazy cool stuff going on from a technology and data standpoint. What Facebook is doing now around disaster preparedness, Airbnb, et cetera. That's another side project altogether on top of sports and music and whatever else I spend my time on.
I know. You're very busy. Thanks again for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
And what was that link again? The chat room was asking for the link to the Revolt.
Revolt.tv.
There you go.
I'll type it in. And don't forget, go blue.
Go blue.
Beat state. Beat state.
Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank both our guests, Bryan and Bryan, for their expertise today. It was a lot of information, and we're going to post some links to that on our website from the standpoint of you go to Marketing Mavericks, you're going to see how to connect with not only that, but some other statistics that Bryan talked about. We're going to post that. You can reach me if you want on social media. You can go to Twitter. I'm at Tonya Hall Radio, but use the hashtag Marketing Mavericks. You can also engage with me on Facebook or go to Marketing Mavericks on Google+. And if you have a show idea, maybe, who you think we should interview or a topic, or just want to give some general feedback, you can old school email me at mavericks@twit.tv. I want to thank everybody for watching, and we'll be back next week with more on the intersection of marketing and technology. Thanks for tuning in.